Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute, unambiguous precision.
Right, like it's completely black and white.
Exactly. It feels like engineering. You fall off your bike, your arm hurts, and you go get an x-ray.
And the doctor just points at the screen.
Yeah, they show you that jagged white line across the bone and say, well, there it is. That is the break.
Which is honestly deeply comforting to the human mind. We desperately want things to be visible.
We really do.
We want them to be quantifiable, to fit neatly into these categories of broken or not broken. It's binary.
But then you step into the world of human behavior, and, well, all of that goes out the window.
Oh, completely. Total chaos.
Right. You try to analyze group dynamics or figure out how to manage collective attention or just try to get a massive group of people to do the exact same thing at the exact same time.
Without absolute pandemonium breaking out.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly that beautiful, precise X-ray machine is just utterly useless. We're looking at a landscape that is incredibly murky.
It really is.
So how do you perfectly systemize what humans do when they gather together in a room?
Well, that is the absolute definition of muddy waters. Because human beings, by our very nature, are wildly unpredictable. We are endlessly distractible. And socially, we're just messy. We bring our egos, our physical ailments, our prejudices, all into every room we enter.
We bring our wandering minds into it, too.
Exactly. And that messiness is exactly what makes our mission today so incredibly fascinating.
It really does. So
Yeah.
today, we are taking a deep dive into an incredibly detailed historical and legal text.
A really massive one.
Yeah, to give you a sense of what we are looking at, our stack of sources today consists of translated excerpts, historical commentaries, and legal marginalia.
It's a lot of material.
It is. It's from the Principles of Jurisprudence regarding prayer and congregation. Specifically, we're looking at the Hanafi school of Islamic law.
Which is a very prominent, highly structured legal tradition.
Right. And before we get into the weeds, I want to be crystal clear with you, the listener, right up front. Our goal today is purely educational.
Absolutely. Educational, sociological, and analytical.
Yes. We are treating these theological texts strictly as sociologists and systems engineers today.
We aren't here to endorse the theology or, take sides in religious debates.
Not at all. We aren't arguing about spiritual truth.
Right. We are here to reverse engineer the mechanics of how this ancient legal tradition actually attempted to manage human behavior.
We're treating this text like what it essentially is, a highly sophisticated, incredibly robust user manual for communal behavior.
That is exactly how it reads, like an operating manual.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Because we are going to explore the fascinating logic behind how this system structured human focus.
Down to the smallest possible detail.
Yeah, social hierarchy, physical space, all of it. We're going to see who gets to lead and where people physically plant their feet.
And what the emergency protocols are when the whole system crashes.
Which is wild. And we'll look at what actually constitutes a distraction when you are trying to achieve absolute focus.
Because when you look at it through that specific lens as a legal framework for a massive collective action, it's amazing.
A collective action that happens multiple times a day, every single day.
Right. Across vast geographic areas, it really reviews itself as a masterclass in systems thinking. It's an attempt to map the unmappable.
Okay, let's dive into the core of it.
Yeah.
Because if we are looking at a system of collective action, there's a foundational question.
Who is in charge?
Exactly.
Right.
Literally any group activity, a corporate board meeting, a hiking expedition, whatever. Who actually leads the room?
Every system needs a focal point. And the text begins by establishing the massive stakes of this gathering.
High stakes, right?
Very high. It defines the congregation itself as a confirmed sunnah. In their legal vocabulary, that means it's an intensely recommended practice.
Like you can't just skip it.
No, you can't just casually opt out because you're feeling introverted that day. The text actually quotes a historical tradition about this.
What does it say?
It states that the congregation is a passive guidance, and that, this is a heavy quote, no one stays behind from it except a hypocrite.
Wow. That is a seriously heavy label to drop on someone who just wants to stay home on a Tuesday.
Right. It tells you the stakes are sky high.
So attendance is effectively mandatory for maintaining the social fabric of the community.
Yes. If you aren't there, you are basically signaling a fracture in the community itself.
And because attendance is so critical, the person standing at the front of that room carries this immense structural burden.
They absolutely do. You need an imam, a leader. And the text lays out the primary gold standard qualification for this leader.
Which is what?
They must be the most knowledgeable in the Sunnah.
Okay.
They need to be the person who possesses the absolute deepest understanding of the jurisprudence, the nuanced rules, all of it.
The hidden mechanics of the religion,
Exactly.
which on its face seems perfectly logical. If you are running a complex operation, put the technical expert in charge.
Makes sense, right?
But as I was reading through the sources, I noticed there was a pretty intense debate about this right out of the gate.
There was a massive debate.
Not everyone agreed that the legal scholar should be the one holding the microphone.
Right, you're hitting on a crucial historical dissenting opinion. It came from a towering historical jurist named Abu Yusuf.
And he had a totally different take.
He did. He looked at the structure of the prayer and argued that the leader shouldn't necessarily be the legal expert.
But rather the best reciter of the Quran.
Yes, the one with the best voice and pronunciation.
I can actually see the logic there, especially in an oral culture.
His logic was strictly functional. He argued that recitation, actually speaking the words aloud, is an absolute non-negotiable requirement.
Without it, the prayer just isn't valid.
Exactly. You simply cannot have a prayer without it. Therefore, the person who executes that specific action with the most skill should lead.
It's a bit like saying, if we are putting on a massive orchestral concert, the person standing at the front needs to be the virtuoso violinist.
Right. Not necessarily the person who wrote the dense textbook on music theory.
Exactly. The audience is there to hear the music, so put your best performer forward.
That is a really compelling way to frame Abu Yusuf's argument. He is prioritizing the immediate functional aesthetic of the ritual.
But the majority didn't buy that.
No, the majority opinion in the Hanafi school counters that with a brilliant piece of pragmatic, almost cynical reasoning.
Oh, I love this part.
They argue that recitation, while beautiful and necessary, is only needed for one specific part of the prayer.
Right.
But deep legal knowledge, that underlying operating code, is required for all parts of the prayer, especially if a sudden crisis occurs.
So they're actively planning for failure.
They are entirely planning for failure. If something goes wrong, like a procedural mistake or an emergency, the guy with the beautiful voice might freeze.
He wouldn't know the rules well enough to fix it.
Exactly. He might not know how to legally salvage the situation. But the encyclopedia guy, he knows exactly which levers to pull.
He knows how to keep the system from collapsing. Okay, I love that. It is the difference between hiring a charismatic frontman to hype up the crowd versus hiring a grizzled stage manager.
A stage manager who actually knows where the fire extinguishers are.
Right. Someone who knows how to keep the building from burning down. In a high-stakes daily ritual, you want the stage manager.
The majority consensus is clear knowledge wins over aesthetics. But, the law has to account for every scenario.
So what if it's a tie? What if you have a room where two people are genuinely equally knowledgeable?
The text provides a remarkably strict set of tiebreakers to avoid any social friction.
Okay, lay them out for me.
If knowledge is equal, then Abu Yusuf gets his wish. The best reciter gets the job.
Nice compromise.
Right. But if they happen to be equal in both knowledge and recitation, the tie goes to the most pious.
The person who is the most intensely scrupulous in their daily life.
Exactly. And if we are still tied, let's say we have two identical, highly knowledgeable, incredibly pious scholars with magnificent voices.
Who gets the job then?
The final tiebreaker goes to the oldest person.
Interesting. Age wins.
Yes. The text explicitly notes that promoting the elder encourages a larger congregation to attend.
So it taps into the deep-seated communal respect for age.
Precisely. It leverages that social dynamic to literally increase the size of the gathering.
So they have built this incredibly precise, idealized hierarchy for leadership. It's like a machine designed to find the perfect resume.
The absolute best candidate floats to the top of the room every single time.
But then, right after establishing this pristine ideal, the text gets into a list of people for whom it is disliked to lead.
Yes, the disliked list.
And reading this list, well, it is a very blunt, somewhat jarring reflection of the social hierarchies of that specific medieval era.
We really have to view this section as a sociological artifact.
Because the law isn't written in a vacuum.
Never. It always reflects the anxieties and prejudices of the society that authors it. So the text lists several categories.
Like a slave.
Yes, it lists a slave. And the reasoning provided isn't inherently malicious, but economic. A slave simply lacks the autonomous free time required to dedicate to the intensive years-long study necessary to become a legal expert.
They just don't have the bandwidth. The social structure denies them the opportunity to meet the primary qualification.
Exactly the case. Then, The list moves on to a Bedouin.
A desert nomad.
Right. And the text explicitly states that this is because the dominant trait among them is ignorance of the urban, complex legal rules.
Wow. Classic city versus country bias.
Totally. The urban jurists are assuming that someone from the desert simply cannot comprehend the intricacies of their metropolitan frameworks.
Which is fascinating because it shows the law positioning itself as an intrinsically urban phenomenon.
It absolutely is. Then, the text lists a sinner.
Defined how?
Defined here as someone who openly and flagrantly flouts communal rules.
Okay, that one makes sense.
Right. The logic is that if they lack the necessary care for their own religious standing, they can't be trusted with the community's prayer.
You wouldn't put the guy who actively ignores city building codes in charge of inspecting the new skyscraper?
Exactly. You need someone who respects the rules to enforce the rules.
Who else is on the list?
Then the text lists a blind person.
Which feels harsh today.
It does, but again, this isn't framed as a moral failing. It's pure physical pragmatism for that era.
Because of the streets.
Yes. The logic dictates that a blind person walking through the often unpaved, dirty streets of a medieval city might accidentally step on physical impurity.
And that would instantly invalidate their ritual purity.
Right, and they might do it without ever realizing it. So they are a structural liability simply because of their environment.
That is wild.
And finally, it lists an illegitimate child.
Why an illegitimate child?
The reasoning is that such a person historically lacked a present father to educate them in these complex rules.
Okay.
And crucially, that putting them forward as the ultimate leader might repel the congregation due to the intense social stigmas of the time.
So they have this very strict, exclusionary list of who shouldn't be the CEO of the prayer.
Highly restrictive.
The law is trying to build a perfect, friction-free environment based on the prejudices and practicalities of the day.
Yes.
But this is the exact moment where the text completely threw me for a loop.
The caveat.
Yes. After spending all this energy establishing a rigid, almost elitist criteria for the perfect leader, the text drops this massive, wild caveat.
It is arguably one of the most revealing and brilliant moments in the entire jurisprudence.
I couldn't believe it when I read it.
After all those ideal qualifications, the text states flatly, if they do lead, it is valid.
Valid.
Yes, and it backs this up with an overarching foundational quote. Pray behind every pious person and sinner.
I seriously had to read that twice. Wait, so they have a perfect ideal. They want a scholarly, pious, urban elder.
With a great voice.
Right. But if the wrong person, maybe a desert nomad or someone with a bad reputation, steps up to the mic and starts leading,
The board of directors just shrugs.
they just say, well, the meeting already started, let's roll with it. The prayer still counts.
That is precisely the genius of the system.
How is that genius? It seems contradictory.
Because if we pull back and look at the macro-level goal of this legal framework, it is not actually about achieving aesthetic perfection.
Okay.
The primary overriding goal is preserving the unity of the congregation. It is about keeping the social body intact.
So preserving the system itself is more important than the credentials of the person running it in that moment.
Without a doubt, imagine the alternative.
Chaos.
Complete chaos. If every single time a slightly unqualified person or someone from the disliked list stepped forward to lead.
And the law demanded that the entire congregation rebel and break apart.
Exactly. You would have constant daily schisms over minor technicalities and rhythm disputes. The community would splinter a dozen times a week.
People would be storming out of the mosque every day saying, his recitation of that vowel was slightly off, the whole thing is ruined, I'm going home.
Exactly. So the law creates a brilliant buffer zone.
It bends.
It says, here is the absolute ideal. You should strive for it. It is strongly disliked to deviate from it.
But if it happens,
But if the messy reality of human life puts the wrong person at the front of the room, the legal validity of the ritual remains completely intact.
the system holds.
You swallow your preference, you stay in your row, and you do not walk out.
It is the ultimate concession to human reality. They knew people were messy, unpredictable, and prone to power struggles.
So the law bends backward to keep the leader in power and the system intact, prioritizing communal harmony over individual perfection.
The law is incredibly rigid in its theory, but incredibly flexible in its application to prevent social collapse.
That is the perfect summary of it.
But that rigid hierarchy isn't just theoretical, is it? It doesn't just dictate who holds the invisible title of leader.
Oh no, it gets very physical.
It literally dictates where every single person's feet are planted in the room. The text treats the physical geometry of the space almost like a living circuit board.
The spatial arrangement is an exact physical manifestation of the legal and social hierarchy we just discussed.
So how is the room laid out?
It is rigid and explicitly defined. The men form the front rows, directly behind the imam.
Okay.
Then behind the rows of men, you have the rows of children. And finally, behind the children, you have the rows of women.
So the physical space is heavily stratified. Let's scale it down for a second. What if it is a tiny group?
How tiny?
Let's say it's just two people in a room, the imam and one single follower. Where do they stand?
If there is only one follower, the geometry is very specific. That person must stand exactly on the right side of the imam.
Right next to him.
Parallel to him, perhaps just a fraction of an inch behind so as not to exceed him physically.
Got it.
The text notes it is intensely disliked for the single follower to stand behind the imam or on his left side. The right side is the designated slot.
Now, imagine we are in that room. The imam is on the left, the single follower is on his right. Suddenly, a second follower walks into the room.
To join the prayer?
Yes. Does he just squeeze in on the right?
No. The moment that third person enters the room, the entire geometry of the circuit board shifts. With two followers, the imam must step forward, and the two followers now form a unified row behind him.
Oh, so the imam physically advances to claim the leader spot.
Yes, though it is worth noting that our dissenting friend Abu Yusuf argued differently here as well.
He always has a different angle. What did he say?
He thought the imam should just stay put and the second follower should stand on his left.
Putting the imam in the middle of a single horizontal line.
Exactly.
Abu Yusuf really loved the aesthetic of the front row, didn't he?
He really did, but the standard Hanafi rule overrides him. The imam must step forward to visually and spatially signify his leadership over a plural group.
Okay, now let's change the demographic. What if the congregation gathering is entirely women?
The text states that it is disliked for women to pray in a congregation entirely on their own.
Really? Why?
We have to unpack the reasoning here, because it is purely spatial and entirely based on the intense modesty norms of that medieval era.
Okay, lay it on me.
If a woman leads the prayer, the law dictates she cannot step forward to stand in front of the congregation like a male imam does.
Why not? If she is the leader, shouldn't she take the leader's physical spot?
The jurists argued that stepping forward would expose her physical form to the rows behind her in a way the culture deemed inappropriate.
Even in a room solely of women?
Yes. Therefore, she is required to stay embedded within the row. She must stand in the middle of the first row to lead.
Just structurally mixed in with the followers?
Yes. The text actually notes that Aisha, a massively prominent historical figure and scholar, historically led prayers doing exactly this.
So they acknowledge there is a highly respected historical precedent for a woman leading a female congregation from within the row?
They acknowledge the precedent, but then they apply their strict structural logic to it.
How does that logic work against it?
Because this modesty requirement forces the imam to remain embedded in the row, which legally is considered a compromised, weakened spatial position for a leader.
Oh, because the leader must be out front.
Right. So the text categorizes the entirely female congregation as legally disliked. They actually compare it to a very strange scenario.
What scenario?
The spatial awkwardness of a congregation of people who have no clothes.
Wait, naked people?
Yes, where the leader also cannot step forward for obvious reasons of physical exposure.
That is a bizarre comparison. But I guess it all comes back to this incredibly strict architectural geometry.
Exactly. Everything has its proper place.
And if you can't occupy the proper place, the whole endeavor is seen as structurally suboptimal.
Suboptimal is the exact right word.
Which brings me to the most mind-bending part of this spatial discussion. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, I know where you're going.
What happens when that geometry is violently violated? Specifically, the text spends a huge amount of time on the rule about a man and a woman standing parallel.
Ah, the infamous parallel standing rule.
Standing parallel to each other in the exact same prayer.
This is where Hanafi legal mechanics get incredibly intricate, almost microscopic in their detail.
Walk us through it.
First, let's establish the baseline spatial rule. A man cannot pray behind a woman or a child. If he does, his prayer is structurally void.
Because he's out of order.
Right. But let's consider the edge case. Let's say a man and a woman are standing side by side.
Perfectly parallel.
Perfectly parallel, shoulder to shoulder, participating in the exact same communal prayer.
So they are completely out of the designated macro formation of men in front, women in back. They are in the same row. What happens?
The legal consequences here are fascinating because they hinge entirely on an invisible internal mechanism.
An invisible mechanism.
Yes. The outcome depends entirely on the concept of intent.
The intent tripwire. I read this section 3 times because it is so wild.
It's very complex.
Explain to the listener how this internal tripwire actually works.
Let's look at the man first. If the man standing next to the woman intended in his heart to act as her imam,
Like he internally decided, I am taking on the legal burden of leading her.
yes. If he forms that intent, his prayer is instantly, irrevocably invalidated.
Wait, his prayer is ruined. Why? He's the one who tried to take responsibility.
Because he attempted to take on a leadership role that he is spatially forbidden from taking in that specific arrangement.
Because he's standing next to her, not in front of her.
Exactly. By intending to lead her while she is standing parallel to him, he legally becomes the abandoner of his mandatory station.
The abandoner of his station.
Yes. His mandatory station, if he is a leader, is to be physically in front of his followers. You simply cannot lead from the side.
So by attempting to lead her from beside her, he breaks the structural integrity of the leadership model.
He tries to run a program that his physical hardware cannot support. Therefore, his own prayer crashes and burns.
Okay, I think I get it. It's like playing a rigid team sport.
Right.
If you are assigned to be the goalie and you suddenly decide internally that you are going to play forward.
Even if you haven't really moved much.
Right. If you start acting like a forward from the goal box, the referee blows the whistle, you've abandoned your station, the game stops.
That analogy captures the spirit, but let me refine it slightly. It's more like a pilot deciding to fly the airplane from a seat in the passenger cabin.
Oh, that's good.
The intention to fly the plane is there, but the spatial position makes the execution inherently disastrous. You cannot pilot from row 12.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The leader must be in the cockpit. But what if the man didn't intend to lead her?
Ah, the alternative scenario.
Yeah, what if he's just standing there, eyes closed, deep in focus, minding his own business, and she happens to walk up and start praying parallel to him?
If he did not form the internal intent to lead her, his prayer is perfectly fine.
Because he's just a passenger in row 12.
Exactly. He didn't violate a station because he never claimed the title of pilot, but in this scenario, hers is invalidated.
Because she is fundamentally out of position based on the macro geometry of the room.
Precisely. The system dictates she is supposed to be in the rows behind the men. By standing parallel to him, her individual prayer structure fails.
Because she isn't being legally absorbed by a leader.
Right. She is in an unsupported zone.
It is wild how much weight is placed on an invisible thought. How could a legal system even enforce that?
They couldn't, practically speaking, and that is a crucial point to understand.
It's honor system jurisprudence.
Much of this is mapping out the theoretical boundaries of validity between the individual and the divine. A human court can't see intent.
But the individual knows.
Yes, and the system requires them to police their own structural integrity. And just to show you how fiercely debated this was, the Shafi school of law looked at this entire Hanafi parallel standing framework and completely rejected it.
What was their argument?
The Shafi scholars argued from a place of simple physical autonomy. They said, look, her prayer might be out of the ideal spatial arrangement.
But why should his prayer be ruined?
Exactly. Why on earth should his prayer be ruined just because he stood next to her and had a thought about leading? That's an overcomplication.
It does seem punishing.
But the Hanafis are utterly obsessed with the structural burden of leadership. If you claim the job of leading, even just in your heart, you must be in the correct physical place to bear the load.
So the spatial rules aren't just aesthetic window dressing. They are literal load-bearing walls in the architecture of the ritual.
Yes.
If you move a wall, the roof collapses.
That is the perfect way to understand Hanafi spatial mechanics.
While we are on the topic of women in the congregation, there was this incredible sociological detail tucked into the text about when it is appropriate for women to attend the mosque.
It really highlights how these laws weren't written in a sterile vacuum.
Yes, the intersection of ritual law and urban sociology.
The text advises that young women are broadly discouraged from attending communal prayers due to the fear of fitna.
Which translates to what, exactly?
It translates broadly to temptation, social discord, or unwanted attention in the public sphere. However, the text explicitly carves out an exception.
For elderly women.
Right. It states there is no harm in elderly women attending the dawn prayer, the sunset prayer, and the night prayer.
The Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha prayers. But they conspicuously leave out the middle of the day.
They do.
They don't want them attending the noon or afternoon prayers. And the reasoning for this blew my mind, because Abu Hanifa himself provides the logic.
It's purely practical.
Yes, it has absolutely nothing to do with theology or spiritual weight. It is pure, street-level, sociological observation.
It is a remarkable glimpse into the reality of a medieval city. Abu Hanifa argues that elderly women shouldn't go out for the noon or afternoon prayers because, and I love the bluntness of the translation.
What does he say?
He says, sinners and troublemakers are spread out and active during the day.
The troublemakers are awake and they're outside.
Exactly. At noon, the markets are full, the streets are crowded, and the potential for harassment or chaos is at its peak.
But at dawn and at night,
Abu Hanifa notes the practical reality. The troublemakers are either fast asleep in their beds or they are at home busy eating dinner.
so the streets are functionally safer and quieter.
Right. Making it socially permissible for the elderly women to navigate the city to attend the mosque.
I love how practical that is. We often think of these ancient religious laws as coming down from on high, completely detached from reality.
Like they were written in the clouds.
Yes. But this reminds you that these jurists were looking out their windows. They were observing traffic patterns, crime rates, and the daily schedules of criminals.
And they were weaving those observations directly into the fabric of religious permission.
The law is acting as a de facto civic infrastructure.
That is a vital point. The law is always inevitably interacting with the gritty reality of the street.
Okay, so we've established the leadership hierarchy, and we've mapped out the physical geometry of the room,
We have.
but there's another invisible hierarchy we need to talk about. It's the actual energy or the legal weight of the prayer itself.
Yeah.
Because the text uses a very specific structural metaphor for this. They call it the concept of albina.
Yes, albina, which translates literally to building or construction. This is arguably the single most crucial structural metaphor in all of Hanafi jurisprudence.
The entire system of congregation rests on this.
It rests on this one fundamental rule. You absolutely cannot build a heavy structure on a light foundation.
So we are moving from architecture to something closer to physics, or maybe software engineering.
I like the software analogy. Let's explore that.
Think of the imam as the foundational operating system of a computer. And think of the follower as the software program trying to run on top of that system.
Let's test that analogy. In this legal framework, a mandatory prayer, a prayer that you are religiously obligated to perform, called a fard, is considered heavy.
It carries massive legal weight
Yeah.
and is structurally demanding.
Yes. Conversely, a voluntary prayer, an extra optional prayer called a no-fall, is considered light.
It is an extra credit assignment. It doesn't carry the same structural burden.
Right. So applying the rule of the building to your software analogy,
A person who is obligated to pray a mandatory heavy fard prayer cannot legally follow an imam who is only praying a voluntary light nafil prayer.
the foundation is simply too weak to support the massive structure being built on top of it.
To use my terms, the software program is too massive and demanding for the basic operating system to process.
The system crashes. The follower's prayer is invalid.
But the reverse must be true, right?
Yes, the reverse works perfectly. A person praying a voluntary light prayer can easily follow an imam who's carrying the burden of a mandatory heavy prayer.
Because a reinforced heavy foundation can effortlessly support a light optional structure.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm tracking the logic.
Yeah.
Heavy supports light. Light cannot support heavy. Now, what if both people are running heavy software?
Okay, let's lay out the scenario.
Let's say they are both praying a mandatory heavy fard prayer, but they're different fard prayer.
Like what?
Let's say the imam is making up his misnoon prayer, but the guy standing behind him is praying the current afternoon prayer.
Both are heavy.
Right. Does it work?
Invalid. The Hanafi school strictly forbids this scenario. You cannot build one specific mandatory structure on top of a completely different mandatory foundation.
Even though they are both heavy.
Correct. The text argues that the very definition of a congregation requires union and sharing. The foundations must match exactly.
You cannot build a brick house on a foundation poured for a suspension bridge.
Exactly. And I imagine you're wondering what the Shafi school thought of this.
Oh, I'm sure the Shafi school dissents here again, right? They seem to be the pragmatists to the Hanafi structuralists.
They absolutely dissent. The Shafi school views the congregation much more loosely as an act of communal harmony.
Or simply sharing the same physical space in a state of worship.
Yes. As long as the physical movements, the bowing, the prostrating generally align, they allow a person praying the noon prayer to follow someone praying the afternoon prayer.
It's about visual synchronization for them.
But for the Hanafis, looking synchronized isn't enough.
Not even close. For the Hanafis, it's about the invisible internal structural integrity of the legal intent.
Two different mandatory prayers have two different legal intents. They are different architectural blueprints.
The Hanafi view requires absolute, identical structural alignment for this system to link up.
Yes.
This idea of the strong versus weak foundation extends way beyond just the category of the prayer, though. It actually applies to the physical, bodily state of the people in the room.
The text outlines what is essentially a literal purity hierarchy.
It does. Walk us through that.
The rule that the strong cannot build upon the weak is universally applied. So, let's look at physical health. A physically healthy person cannot legally pray behind an excused person.
Meaning someone who has a chronic condition that compromises their ritual purity, like chronic bleeding.
Exactly. The healthy person's state is stronger, so they cannot build their prayer on the weaker foundation of the excused imam.
It's all about load-bearing capacity.
It really is. The text lists other examples. A literate person who can read the Quran cannot follow an illiterate person who cannot.
Makes sense.
A clothed person cannot follow a naked person. In all these cases, the follower possesses a stronger or more complete legal state than the leader.
If the strong tries to follow the weak, the structural rule is broken and the prayer is void. Your foundation has to be at least as strong or stronger than the house you are building.
Right.
But as I was reading, I noticed there are some totally wild edge cases where the jurists fiercely debate what actually constitutes strong versus weak. It gets really philosophical.
The edge cases are where the underlying legal philosophy really shines.
Let's talk about ablution, ritual washing before the prayer.
Okay. Normally, you are required to wash with actual water. That is the gold standard.
Right.
But the law makes an allowance. If there is no water available, or if using water would harm you physically, you can perform a symbolic dry ablution using clean earth or dust.
This is called tayammum.
Yes.
Okay, so let's set up this scenario. Can an imam who only used the symbolic dry dust lead a congregation full of people who fully washed with actual water?
Instinctively, based on the purity hierarchy we just discussed, you'd think the answer has to be no.
Dust seems obviously weaker and less pure than water.
That instinct is exactly what drove the argument of Muhammad, one of the most prominent students of the Hanafi school.
What did he say?
He looked at the scenario and said, absolutely not. Dry ablution is a necessity purification. It's a backup plan, a concession.
And water is the original, strong, uncompromised purification.
Therefore, the dust user is weaker and cannot lead the water users.
It's a solid, logical argument based on their own rules. But Abu Hanifa, the founder of the school, disagreed with his own student.
He did, and his counterargument is a masterclass in legal theory. Abu Hanifa ruled that the dust user can absolutely lead the water users.
How does he justify that? How does dust equal water?
Because Abu Hanifa isn't looking at the physical dirt, he is looking at the legal decree.
Okay.
He argues that the law explicitly declares dry ablution to be an absolute, complete purification in the absence of water. It is not defined as a half measure or a partial purity.
Legally speaking, it is a 100% full replacement.
Exactly. Therefore, in the eyes of the law, the legal state of the man who used dust is functionally identical and structurally equal to the man who used water.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
He completely detaches the legal reality from the physical reality.
Yes. Legally, the dust becomes just as heavy as the water because the divine law said so.
Okay, what about the debate over the leather socks?
Wiping over footwear. The rule is that if you put on specific leather socks while you are in a state of purity, you can later just wipe over them with wet hands instead of taking them off and fully washing your bare feet.
The question arises, can an imam who merely wiped his socks lead followers who meticulously watched their bare feet?
Again, wiping seems weaker than washing.
But the text says yes, he can lead.
The logic here is that the wiping legally prevents the ritual impurity from penetrating to the foot in the first place.
So it's a shield.
Yes. Therefore, the imam's state of purity is considered entirely preserved and fully intact, making him structurally equal to the foot washers.
Okay, let's try one more edge case, and this one involves physical posture. Let's look at a standing person versus a sitting person.
Okay.
A healthy person standing up on their own 2 feet is clearly physically stronger than someone who is forced to sit in a chair due to illness.
Undeniably.
So, applying the building rule, a healthy, standing congregation shouldn't be able to follow an imam who is sitting down, right?
Bleh.
The software is too heavy for the sitting hardware.
Logically, based purely on the algorithmic principle of the building, you were absolutely correct. And once again, Muhammad, the brilliant student, argued exactly this.
He stuck to the rules.
He applied the rule consistently. He said it is invalid. The standing state is demonstrably stronger than the sitting state. The strong cannot follow the weak.
But the text says it is allowed. They break their own fundamental structural rule. Why?
Because of historical precedent. And this raises a profound point about how this entire legal system operates. Logic, analogy, and structural rules are paramount, but an established historical precedent from the Prophet trumps all logic.
Precedent breaks the algorithm.
Completely. The text notes that the Prophet Muhammad's very last prayer before he died was performed while he was sitting down due to his severe illness, while the congregation of his companions behind him stood.
Wow.
Because that undeniable historical event occurred and was validated, the Hanafi jurists are forced to abandon their own flawless logical analogy of the building in this one specific instance.
That is such a revealing detail. The system is incredibly rigid, logical, and mathematical, right up until it hits a documented physical action of the founder.
And then the entire rigid structure just bends entirely around that one historical moment.
It shows a deep humility within the law, admitting that logic has limits.
Precisely. It is a system built on logic but tethered to history.
Okay, so let's assume we have successfully built the perfect structure. The leader is chosen, the geometry of the room is perfectly set, the structural foundations of heavy and light all match up. The prayer begins.
Everything is running smoothly.
What happens when the system suddenly, violently crashes mid-worship?
You are talking about crisis management.
Yes. This is where the text reads like a disaster response manual. Let's look at the scenario. The imam is standing at the front, leading hundreds of people. The room is dead silent. Everyone is in a state of deep focus.
Okay.
And suddenly, the imam gets a severe nosebleed. Or he vomits. Or he bleeds from a wound. He instantly loses his physical state of ritual purity, his wudu.
The foundation of the entire room is suddenly collapsing.
What is the emergency protocol?
The protocol is remarkably strict, highly choreographed, and incredibly tense.
Walk us through it.
If a worshiper, especially the imam, loses their wudu mid-prayer via a nosebleed or any involuntary bodily function, they must immediately, without saying a single word, leave the congregation.
Just walk out.
They must walk away, go to a water source, perform their ablution to regain purity, return to their exact spot, and literally build upon the prayer right from the exact microsecond they left off.
They just hit pause on a live multiplayer video game, walk away to wash up, come back, and hit play again.
That is functionally what they're doing, though the text does add a theological caveat.
Which is?
It notes that while this building process is legally allowed, simply giving up and restarting the entire prayer from scratch is deemed better or more cautious.
Because of the other schools of thought.
Yes. The Shafi school vehemently argues that you cannot simply pause and build after a physical departure. They think the Hanafi pause button is legally absurd, but the Hanafis maintain that it is valid.
But wait, let's think about the mechanics of this. If the imam, the leader of the room, gets a nosebleed and just turns around and walks away to the sink, what happens to the hundreds of people standing behind him?
They can't just wait.
Are they just stuck on pause, staring at an empty space?
This is where the brilliant and highly risky concept of istiklaf comes in.
Which translates to?
It translates to the appointment of a successor. The imam cannot just walk away and leave a leadership vacuum. The system would collapse. As he is bleeding and turning to leave, he must physically reach out and pull someone from the road directly behind him forward to take his place.
It's the ultimate mid-flight pilot swap. The plane is diving, and you just yank a guy from first class into the captain's chair.
Exactly. And the successor must immediately step onto the imam's spot and seamlessly continue leading the prayer from that exact moment without missing a single beat.
But this requires the bleeding, panicking imam to pick the right person in a fraction of a second. What if he grabs the wrong guy?
The domino effect of a bad swap is catastrophic for the entire system.
Okay, play it out.
Remember the purity hierarchy we just discussed? Let's say the bleeding imam is a highly literate scholar who can recite the Quran beautifully.
A strong foundation.
In a panic, he grabs a guy from the front row and pulls him forward. But it turns out that specific guy is entirely illiterate and hasn't memorized any of the necessary Quranic verses.
You just pulled a weak foundation forward to replace a strong foundation.
Yes, and the law is unforgiving here. The exact moment that illiterate man steps into the physical leadership position, the entire congregation's prayer becomes instantly invalid.
The whole room is done.
The foundation has fundamentally cracked under the weight of the room. The text makes it absolutely clear. The successor must be legally capable of bearing the exact same burden of leadership as the man he is replacing.
That puts terrifying pressure on anyone standing in the front row. You have to be ready to catch the wheel at any second.
It's a high-stress position.
And here is the part of the crisis protocol that I found most fascinating. Let's say the swap goes perfectly. The bleeding imam leaves, washes up, and comes back into the room.
Okay, he's clean.
The new guy is up front, successfully leading. The original imam doesn't get to march up to the front and take his spot back, does he?
No, he does not. His time as the pilot is over.
Wow.
When the replaced imam returns, clean and ready, he is no longer the leader. He must quietly join the back of the congregation as a mere follower of the very guy he just promoted.
He has been structurally demoted by his own emergency protocol.
Yes.
I absolutely love that. It proves that the system itself is vastly bigger and more important than any individual's ego or title. The system prioritizes continuity over personal authority.
Continuity is everything.
But this whole concept of hitting pause and walking to the sink, it seems incredibly fragile. What actually breaks this delicate state of building?
Almost anything that involves conscious worldly interaction. You have to understand the cognitive state the person is supposed to be in.
Right.
During that walk to the sink, you are not a normal person walking down a hallway. You are in a highly precarious, suspended state of legal prayer.
You are holding your breath,
Yeah.
legally speaking.
Exactly. If you speak a single word to anyone, your prayer is instantly void. If you perform any physical act that is unrelated to the necessary task of getting clean, it is void. You are walking a tightrope.
And the text gives some incredibly specific, almost surreal hypothetical examples of what breaks this suspended state. They read like bizarre thought experiments.
They do, but they are designed to test the absolute outer boundaries of the legal logic. For example, the text posits a scenario. What if a completely naked person is praying, which is allowed if they have absolutely no clothes,
Right.
and they lose wudu, so they walk away to the sink? On the way to the sink, they suddenly find a shirt lying on the ground and they put it on. What happens?
Instinctively, you'd think that's great they covered themselves.
But the law says the prayer is instantly void.
Because he got dressed.
Because the act of putting on the shirt is an action extraneous to the necessary ablution. It is a worldly, physical action that breaks the continuous, suspended state of the ritual.
You can't multitask.
Exactly. The law demands you do nothing but fix the specific error that paused the prayer. Or, here's another one. What if an illiterate person is walking to the sink and suddenly, miraculously, learns a chapter of the Quran?
Like they just overhear someone reciting in the courtyard and memorize it on the spot.
Yes.
I remember this. The text says their prayer is void.
Yes, it does.
Because their foundational state changed. They literally upgraded their software mid-reboot, so the old session they were trying to return to is no longer compatible with their new upgraded hardware. It is invalid.
That is exactly the legal logic. Any fundamental shift in your legal capability or your physical state breaks the continuity of the pause. You cannot return to the old prayer because you are legally no longer the same person who left it.
That is mind-bending. What about false alarms? Let's say I'm praying. I think I feel my nose bleeding. I hit pause, I turn around, I walk all the way out of the mosque into the bustling street, I check my face, and I realize I'm totally fine.
It was just sweat.
Yeah, it was just a bead of sweat. Can I just walk back in and keep going?
No. The moment you step outside the geographical boundary of the mosque, based on a false assumption, your prayer is irreparably invalid.
Even though I didn't actually bleed.
You have definitively abandoned the sacred ritual space without a legally valid actual excuse.
But what if I realize it was a false alarm before I step out the door? What if I'm still in the courtyard?
Then you are saved by the geography. If you are still inside the walls or boundaries of the mosque, or the designated prayer area if you're outside, you can simply turn around, walk back to your spot, and seamlessly continue.
So the physical spatial boundary of the mosque acts as a literal legal safety net. As long as you are inside the walls, the system gives you the benefit of the doubt.
It assumes you are still engaged in the process.
But the second you cross the threshold into the secular world, it cuts the cord.
It highlights how physical space defines legal reality in this framework. The walls of the building are the boundaries of the law's patience.
And there are certain things that don't just pause the prayer, they force a total, unrecoverable restart, no matter where you were standing, right?
Yes. Certain physiological or psychological events shatter the system entirely.
Like what?
Going insane mid-prayer, fainting, falling asleep, and having a wet dream. These completely obliterate the conscious, ritual state required for worship.
They wipe the hard drive.
Exactly. But there is one more action that forces a total restart, and it bridges the gap between the physical and the psychological. Laughing aloud.
Laughing ruins it, but smiling doesn't.
That's a vital distinction. Laughing aloud, to the point where others around you can hear the sound, is legally categorized as speech.
Oh, interesting.
The jurists argue it produces distinct letters and sounds. And speech, as we will see, is the ultimate absolute destroyer of the prayer state.
Which perfectly transitions us into the internal mechanics of the worshiper. We've talked deeply about physical purity, bleeding, and spatial geometry.
The hardware.
Right. But how does this text define the psychological state of the person praying? What actually constitutes a distraction? Because to me, reading this section is where the text stops feeling like a medieval law book and starts feeling like a hyper-modern, intense manual on achieving deep cognitive focus.
It is a profound exploration of human attention and the frailties of the human mind.
So what's the baseline rule?
The absolute unyielding baseline rule is that speaking, whether deliberate, accidental, or out of pure forgetfulness, instantly breaks the prayer.
Any speaking at all?
Yes. The text quotes a saying of the prophet to anchor this. In this prayer of ours, nothing of the everyday speech of people is appropriate.
It has to be a completely closed circuit. You cannot let the outside world in.
Exactly. But the genius of the jurists is how they define everyday speech. This brings us to what I think is the most fascinating psychological trap in the text. The empathy trap.
The empathy trap. Yes, let's talk about this. Think about the last time you were in a dead, silent room, maybe taking a massive final exam or sitting in a quiet theater. The person right next to you sneezes.
Okay.
Your instinct to say bless you is so deeply ingrained, so intensely socialized, that it feels almost involuntary, right? It's muscle memory.
And in the context of this ritual, that muscle memory is fatal.
Fatal.
If the person next to you sneezes mid-prayer and you reflexively say Yerhamak Allah, which translates to may God have mercy on you, the equivalent of bless you, your prayer is instantly invalidated.
Even though it's a polite thing to say. Even though the phrase itself literally mentions God. It's not a dirty word, it's a prayer.
It doesn't matter that it mentions God. What matters is the vector of the communication. It is the everyday speech of people. It is a horizontal communication.
You are talking to the human being standing next to you.
Exactly. The ritual of prayer requires a strictly, fiercely vertical communication between you and the divine.
Right.
The moment you break that vertical connection to engage in a horizontal social pleasantry, you have stepped out of the ritual and back into the mundane world. Polite society is the anchor to the material world, and you are supposed to be untethered from it.
I love how hostile the law is to polite society in this specific 10-minute window.
Right.
It demands total isolation. But let's test this horizontal versus vertical theory.
Let's test it.
What if someone in the room makes a mistake in their Quran recitation? They forget a line, and I speak up out loud to correct them.
This is where the nuance is brilliant. The text states clearly, correcting a stranger's recitation breaks your prayer.
Why?
Because by correcting a stranger, you are engaging in the worldly act of teaching and learning. You have positioned yourself as a teacher to another human being.
Which is a horizontal, worldly interaction. You are managing the room instead of managing your soul.
Exactly. But T, if the person making the mistake is your own imam, the specific leader of the exact prayer you are currently plugged into, correcting him out loud does not break your prayer.
Why? You are still opening your mouth and talking to another human being. It's still horizontal.
Because legally, the context completely alters the nature of the action. You're not viewed as teaching him. You are viewed as repairing your own prayer.
Oh, the building metaphor again.
Exactly. If his foundation cracks because he forgets the words, your entire structure crashes. Therefore, feeding him the correct line is a necessary internal maintenance action required to preserve the structural integrity of your own ritual.
It is internal to the closed system, not an external social interaction. The logic is so airtight. It's almost terrifying. It is the difference between engaging in a side chat with a coworker versus hitting the override switch to keep the factory from exploding. One is a distraction, the other is system preservation.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's push this even further into the realm of human emotion. Words are one thing, they require cognitive formulation. But what about raw, involuntary sounds? Moaning, sighing, crying.
The jurisprudence here is incredibly psychologically astute regarding human suffering.
What's the ruling?
If you sigh deeply, saying ah or oh, or if you moan or cry out because you are in sudden physical pain, or perhaps because you are suddenly overwhelmed remembering a worldly tragedy like the loss of a job or a loved one, your prayer is invalidated.
Because it is a complaint.
Yes. The jurists classify these sounds as an expression of human complaint and distress about the material world. It is, functionally and legally, the speech of people.
You are broadcasting your physical or emotional state to the room. You are still tied to the earth.
But there is an exception, and it's a beautiful one.
A major revealing exception.
If the crying, the weeping, or the sighing is triggered by the recitation of the prayer itself, specifically by the mention of the majesty of heaven or the terrors of hell, the prayer remains perfectly valid.
Wow.
In fact, the text notes this indicates profound humility, fear, and ultimate focus.
So what does this all mean? Let me try to summarize the underlying philosophy here.
Yeah.
Basically, the law is acting as an ancient, highly calibrated, noise-canceling headphone.
I like that.
Anything that connects you horizontally to the human world, saying, bless you to a sneeze, playing teacher to a stranger, or crying over a stubbed toe, or a lost worldly possession, breaks the connection, because it means the world still has a grip on you.
That's exactly right.
But vertical connection, weeping over the afterlife, or fixing your imam to keep the ritual system running, preserves the connection. It is entirely 100% about the direction and vector of your attention.
That is exceptional summary of the Hanafi psychological theory of prayer. It is entirely about the vector of your attention. Is your internal compass pointed inward and upward, or is it distracted outward and sideways?
Which perfectly explains Abu Hanifa's incredibly strict ruling on reading from a book during prayer.
Yes, this was a major point of contention. Abu Hanifa ruled that reading from a physical copy of the Quran, holding the mushaf in your hands, and reading the pages during the prayer completely invalidates the prayer.
Even though you are literally reading the exact sacred words you're supposed to be saying, how can reading the Quran be a distraction from the prayer?
His reasoning is twofold and deeply tied to this idea of cognitive vectors. First, there is the physical aspect. The act of holding a heavy book, supporting it, and turning the pages constitutes excessive movement, which physically shatters the required stillness and physical discipline of the ritual.
Okay, the physical movement is bad. What's the second reason?
The second, far more important reason is cognitive. He argues that reading text from a page is intrinsically an act of learning or acquiring information. You are taking in new data through your eyes from a physical object located in the external world.
Which breaks the vertical connection.
Right. This cognitive process pulls your internal state out of the spiritual memorized flow and grounds your brain in a horizontal mechanical action of data processing.
You are interacting with an object in the room rather than communing with the divine in your heart. You've outsourced your focus to a prop.
Exactly. Now, it is important to note that his own top students, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, disagreed with him on this.
They were okay with it.
They viewed reading from the book simply as adding one valid form of worship reading scripture to another valid form of worship praying. They didn't see the conflict.
But Abu Hanifa's much stricter view prioritizes the total, uncompromising isolation of the internal cognitive state.
For him, the prayer must come from within, not from a page.
It's just brilliant. It is a war against distraction. Okay, we've looked at the internal distractions, the noise inside your own head or coming out of your own mouth. Finally, let's look at the external hazards.
Because the physical world is messy.
People walk around, bugs bite, things distract you visually. How does the system handle the chaotic physical environment?
It starts by literally demanding you build a wall. The text discusses at length the concept of the sutra, which is a physical barrier.
A physical barrier.
If you are praying in an open, vulnerable space, like a vast desert or a bustling open field, you are legally required to place a sutra in front of you.
What are the exact specs for this wall? Because I know this text loves its measurements.
The text is, as always, very precise. The barrier must be at least 1 cubit high, which is roughly the length of a human forearm, and about a finger's thickness.
Okay.
And crucially, you don't place it dead center in front of your face. You place it slightly offset, aligning it near your right or left eyebrow.
Okay, practically speaking, what is the point of sticking a forearm-length stick in the middle of a massive desert? It's not going to stop a camel.
It's not a physical barricade. It is a legal demarcation. It defines your sovereign legal space.
It creates a zone.
It establishes an invisible vertical boundary that passersby are strictly forbidden to cross. It protects your immediate visual field from moving objects, and it preserves your ritual integrity from the chaos of the open world.
And what if someone does cross it? Let's say you're praying in a busy market square, you have your stick down, and a woman carrying groceries walks right between you and the stick.
Historically, there were intense theological debates about whether this shattered the prayer, but this Hanafi text clarifies and settles the matter. A woman passing in front of you does not break your prayer.
So you're safe.
The physical and structural integrity of your ritual remains intact. The system survives the intrusion. However, the text forcefully notes that the person passing, whether man or woman, commits a severe sin for violating that sovereign boundary if they had any other physical option to walk around.
So your prayer survives the hit, but they get the penalty flag for trespassing on sacred ground.
Exactly. And you, as the worshiper, are actually encouraged to ward them off. You can make a physical gesture to stop them, or you can speak a specific phrase of praise, like saying subhanallah loudly, to alert them.
But if they bulldoze through the line anyway, your system holds.
Right.
Okay, so the sutra manages the macro environment, the people walking around. What about the micro environment? Our own bodies. We are twitchy creatures.
We really are.
The text has a long, highly specific list of disliked physical movements.
Yes, this section is all about enforcing physical discipline to aid mental focus. Fidgeting with your clothes, your beard, or your body is highly disliked.
No fidgeting.
The text quotes the prophet saying that God dislikes playing in the prayer. Moving pebbles on the ground is disliked, though there is a highly pragmatic allowance.
What's the allowance?
You can brush the pebbles away exactly once if it is absolutely necessary to create a smooth spot to place your bare forehead on the ground for prostration.
One swipe only. Any more than that, and you are doing landscaping, not praying.
One swipe is a necessity. 2 swipes is playing. Furthermore, cracking your knuckles or interlacing your fingers is explicitly forbidden.
They've really thought of everything.
Putting your hands on your hips is forbidden, as it was historically seen as a posture of arrogance, defiance, or casual resting, completely contrary to the intense physical humility required in the ritual.
You can't just stand there like you're waiting for a bus.
Exactly. Turning your neck to look around the room is intensely disliked, as it breaks the physical vector of your focus.
But I love the very human caveat here. You can't turn your neck, but
looking out of the corners of your eyes without moving your head is perfectly fine. The text notes with a bit of historical color that the prophet used to subtly keep an eye on his companions this way during the prayer.
the side eye is legally permissible. I love that. The law acknowledges that you still need peripheral vision. Now, what about the visual environment of the room itself? The aesthetics of where you are looking?
Visual distractions are taken very seriously, specifically living images or representational art of humans and animals. Let's look at the floor first.
Okay, what about the floor?
Praying on a rug that has pictures of animals on it is technically fine, because by standing on it and stepping your feet on the images, you are inherently showing disrespect to the representation, preventing it from ever becoming an object of veneration.
You are literally trampling the art. But what about when you go down to prostrate?
Prostrating directly onto the face of the picture on the rug is intensely disliked because visually it mimics the act of worshiping the image itself.
That makes visual sense. What about the walls?
Furthermore, the walls matter. Having pictures hanging above you on the ceiling, in front of you on the wall, or immediately to your right or left is highly disliked. It is treated as a visual pollutant that draws the eye and pollutes the ritual focus.
But there is a hilarious, incredibly legalistic loophole here.
It is a very practical, almost funny loophole. The law states that if a picture has its head erased, scratched out, or cut off, it is legally no longer considered a living image.
It reverts to being just a geometric shape or a pattern.
Exactly. Therefore, a headless portrait is perfectly fine to have around while praying. Similarly, if the image is so small, like a tiny engraving on a ring, that a casual observer wouldn't be able to recognize the details from a standing distance, the law simply ignores it.
Just chop the head off the portrait and we're good to pray. I love how literal and mechanical it is. It's not about the vibe of the art, it's about the technical classification of a living entity. Which brings me to my absolute favorite part of the entire
The
text.
scorpion.
Yes, I call this the action movie clause. We've established you can't talk, you can't sigh,
Right.
you can't crack your knuckles, you can barely smooth the dirt one time. What happens if a deadly physical threat approaches you mid-prayer?
Things escalate quickly.
What if a massive scorpion crawls onto your prayer mat while you are reciting?
The text is completely unambiguous on this point. It explicitly and actively encourages killing the two black ones, which historically referred to venomous snakes and scorpions, even while you are actively mid-prayer.
You can just violently stomp on a scorpion mid-recitation?
Yes. You can strike it, kill it, and it does not break the prayer.
Wait. Let's hold up and examine the consistency here. Let me get this straight. I can legally engage in physical combat with a venomous scorpion, violently stomping it to death on the floor, but I cannot crack my knuckles, and I cannot count the verses on my fingers to keep track of where I am.
It sounds absurd on the surface.
How is that logically consistent?
If we pull back and connect this to the overarching theory of the entire legal system, the logic is actually flawlessly consistent. Ask yourself, why are you killing the scorpion?
So it doesn't sting me and put me in the hospital.
Exactly. You are removing a fundamental mortal threat to your physical life. And if your life is threatened, your ability to maintain any semblance of spiritual focus is completely obliterated. The text actually compares killing the scorpion to warding off a person trying to walk across your sutra barrier.
Oh, I see.
It is an act of preserving the integrity and safety of the prayer space. Cracking your knuckles, fidgeting with your clothes, counting on your fingers, those are frivolous, voluntary, unnecessary actions that originate from your own internal lack of discipline. Killing the snake is a necessary, involuntary defense of the entire system.
Preservation of life completely overrules the aesthetic stillness of the posture. The system is rigid, but it isn't suicidal. That is incredible. And you mentioned counting on your fingers. That actually transitions into how the text views the economics and management of the mosque itself, doesn't it?
It does, briefly but very tellingly. The text notes that counting verses or phrases on your fingers during the prayer is disliked because it is an earthly, mathematical accounting method being dragged into a purely spiritual space. You are treating worship like a ledger. But this skepticism of earthly accounting comes into sharp focus when the text discusses decorating the mosque.
Right. The gold, the engravings, the fancy architecture.
The text states quite dryly that decorating the mosque with ornate plaster, elaborate wood carvings, or gold water brings absolutely no religious reward whatsoever. God does not care about your gold leaf ceiling. If you do it with your own private, personal money, it is merely permitted, meaning you won't be actively punished for it, but you certainly aren't gaining any spiritual points for your vanity.
What if you aren't using your own money? What if you are the manager of the mosque?
This is the crucial, biting legal distinction. If the caretaker of the mosque uses endowment funds, the waqf, the communal money donated specifically for the functional structural upkeep of the building, to buy frivolous gold decorations or ornate carvings, it is highly illegal. It is classified as an embezzlement of functional public funds for aesthetic vanity, and the penalty is severe. The caretaker must personally reimburse the endowment fund from their own private pocket.
Boom. The law doesn't just manage where you put your feet or how you wash your face. It manages the budget. It protects the communal funds from the vanity of the leadership.
It is a totalizing system. It leaves no stone unturned, from the internal whisper of intent to the public ledger of the endowment.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've gone from the macro politics of who gets the lead all the way down to the micromechanics of stomping on a scorpion. Let's try to bring this all together. What we've looked at today, these excerpts from this medieval Hanafi text on prayer and congregation, it isn't just a dusty historical list of archaic rules about where to stand or how to wash your hands.
Not at all. It is a breathtakingly comprehensive, fiercely logical system. It is an audacious attempt to perfectly map and manage human attention, social hierarchy, emergency protocols, and physical space during a collective high-stakes daily ritual. It deeply anticipates human failure, it provides brilliant, pragmatic backup plans, and it fiercely, uncompromisingly guards the boundaries of collective human focus against the chaos of the material world.
In an era like ours, where our attention is constantly fractured by a million digital notifications, where we can barely sit through a 2-hour movie without checking our phones to see what the rest of the world is doing, there's something deeply, deeply resonant about an ancient system that strictly defines what is actually worthy of breaking your focus.
I think that's exactly the modern takeaway. It forces you to aggressively categorize the interruptions in your life. It demands that you separate the fatal threats from the minor annoyances.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. I want you to think about your own modern life. If you had to sit down and write the jurisprudence for your deepest work, or the absolute rules for your most important family time, what would be your equivalent of the sutra barrier? How do you actually protect your sovereign space from passersby? And perhaps more importantly, what are the scorpions you'd actually allow yourself to fight and break your focus for, versus the mere sneezes you would force yourself to completely ignore?
What if I told you that in classical Islamic law, praying completely naked could, sometimes be considered more religiously valid than praying in a dirty shirt?
It sounds totally contradictory, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually a core part of the framework.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Imagine just for a moment that you are required to perform a highly precise physical and mental routine.
Right.
And you don't just do this once a week when the mood strikes you or once a month when you feel particularly centered. You do it multiple times a day,
Yeah.
every single day of your life.
Every day. Yeah.
Now, imagine that for this daily routine, the exact angle of your back, the specific placement of your fingers, and even the internal language of your own private thoughts are all subject to intense, centuries-old legal debate.
Which is wild to think about today.
It is, because usually when we think of a daily ritual in the modern world, we think of something deeply personal, maybe a bit loose.
Like yoga or journaling.
Right. You meditate however feels right to you in the moment. You journal whatever comes to mind. But what if the pathway to the divine was mapped out with the agonizing precision of a modern corporate contract? Or, a highly complex architectural blueprint?
That framing really gets to the heart of what we're examining today, because we tend to completely separate the spiritual from the legal in our modern minds.
We really do.
If you ask someone on the street today, they think of the law as something that governs our taxes, our property lines, or how fast we can drive.
Right, secular stuff.
Exactly. And they think of spirituality as this boundless, unconstrained, highly individualized feeling. But the text we are looking at today completely shatters that binary.
It really does.
It treats the spiritual connection as something that requires a rigorous, almost mathematical, legal framework to actually execute successfully.
And the text we're diving into is a foundational work of classical Islamic jurisprudence. Specifically, we're looking at translated excerpts from a dense, highly influential text called Provisions of Prayer and Recitation Standards.
It's a heavy text.
It's very heavy. What this text does is meticulously break down the rigorous conditions, what the classical scholars call the shurut, and the exact physical descriptions, or the sifat, of the Islamic prayer, the salat. It is essentially a legal operating manual for connecting with God.
And we are incredibly fortunate to have this specific cross-section of source material to analyze, because it doesn't just give us a simple, flat instruction manual.
Right. It's not just a checklist.
Exactly. It doesn't just say, do A, B, and C. It gives us the underlying debates. It gives us the dissenting opinions, the arguments, and the counter-arguments of the greatest legal minds of their era.
Which is fascinating to read.
We're looking at figures like Abu Hanifa, who founded the largest school of Islamic jurisprudence, and his top students, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, who, by the way, frequently disagreed with him.
They really didn't hold back.
Not at all. And we also see the contrasting views of the Shafi school of thought. You get to see the actual gears of the legal reasoning turning in real time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today for this deep dive isn't just to list off a bunch of religious rules.
That would be incredibly dry.
Yeah, it would sound like reading a textbook, and frankly, it would miss the entire point of the material. Our mission is to explore what I like to call the architecture of intention and action.
I like that phrase.
Thanks. We are going to unpack how these classical scholars balanced this incredibly intense, burning desire for divine perfection with the very real, very messy, and sometimes highly inconvenient limitations of human life.
Because it's one thing to say worship perfectly.
Right. But what do you do when the law demands perfection, but you're lost in the dark? Or the ground is freezing cold? Or, as we mentioned earlier, you don't even have clean clothes?
It is the ultimate collision of the sacred and the mundane. These scholars had to build a system robust enough to conceptually touch heaven, but flexible enough to practically survive on Earth.
Surviving on Earth is the hard part.
Exactly. They were legislating for real human beings living in unpredictable environments, not angels living in a vacuum.
You might think a ritual is just a list of steps you memorize, but as you'll see, it's a profound legal framework. So let's start with the perimeter.
The physical boundaries.
Right. Before anyone can even utter a single word of this prayer, before they even cross the threshold into the sacred headspace, they have to navigate a labyrinth of physical prerequisites.
They really do.
If you are listening to this right now, look at your own body and the space around you. To you, you're just sitting in a car or walking down the street. But in this legal framework, you are looking at a complex map of borders and boundaries.
It's almost like establishing a physical perimeter, a barrier between the everyday world and the sacred space of the prayer.
And the very first barrier they establish, the human body itself.
The text begins with a fundamental prerequisite, which is the covering of the body, known in the jurisprudence as the Ora.
Okay, the Ora.
Right. And the basis for this, the text notes, comes directly from a Quranic injunction to take adornment at every masjid, which the classical scholars universally interpret as a mandate to cover what must be covered during every single prayer.
So you have to dress up, essentially.
The logic is that you are stepping into a royal audience, so you cannot show up in a state of undress. But of course, the moment a legal text says, cover what must be covered.
But the lawyers step in.
Exactly. The immediate, unavoidable legal question is, well, what exactly are the boundaries? Where does the restriction start and where does it end?
And this is where the text starts to read like a zoning law for the human anatomy. I was absolutely captivated by this. Let's look at the rules for men first.
Okay.
The general baseline rule stated in the text is that the Ora for a man is the area from below the navel down to the knee. On the surface, that sounds simple enough.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
But the scholars immediately start arguing about the exact borders. It's exactly like two neighboring countries arguing over a river that divides them. Who owns the river?
Right. Who claims the navel? The text highlights a brilliant debate between the Hanafi school and the Shafi school regarding the exact borders of the navel and the knee. Think of it as a dispute over the physical checkpoints of the body.
Checkpoints. I like that.
According to the Hanafi text we are looking at, the navel itself is not part of the Ora. It is the boundary line, but it is not the restricted zone.
Okay, so if the navel is exposed, the prayer is still valid.
Yes. However, the knee is included in the Ora. The knee absolutely must be covered.
Wait, I need to stop you there. So the Hanafi school says the navel is safe, but the knee is restricted. But the Shafi school, as cited in our text, argues the exact opposite.
They do. It's a total flip.
They say no, the navel is part of the Ora and must be rigorously covered, but the knee is not. The knee is free. It is fascinating to me that these brilliant historical jurists are spending so much intense intellectual energy debating the legal status of a kneecap.
I mean, it sounds funny when you put it like that.
Right. Why are they splitting hairs over a few inches of skin?
It's a great question, and it goes to the heart of how classical jurisprudence actually works. They aren't just making arbitrary choices based on what they think looks more modest.
So it's not an aesthetic choice.
No, not at all. It all comes down to an intense linguistic analysis of the source traditions. The text explicitly mentions that the debate hinges entirely on the Arabic prepositions used in the prophetic traditions regarding the body.
Prepositions.
Specifically, words like ila, which translates to, and hata, which translates to until.
So it's a grammar debate.
Precisely. It's all about grammar. Does the phrase up to the knee mean the knee itself is included in the restriction? Or does it mean the restriction stops right before the knee begins?
Wow.
They are performing grammatical surgery to determine the exact millimeter where the sacred requirement begins and the mundane world ends.
That is incredibly granular.
Right, so for the Hanafi scholars, the preposition used implies inclusion of the endpoint, so the knee gets swallowed into the restricted zone. For the Shafi'i scholars, their linguistic analysis leads them to the opposite conclusion.
It really feels like an incredibly precise legal audit of the human body. It's like when tax lawyers argue over whether a specific business lunch is 50% deductible or 100% deductible based on a single comma in the tax code.
That's a great comparison.
And the precision only intensifies when the text moves to the rules for women. The baseline rule established here is that the entire body of the woman is a ra. It must be completely covered during prayer except for her face and her hands.
Right.
The text notes that these two specific exceptions are made because of the trial or the absolute unavoidable necessity of showing them in daily life to function, to buy, sell, and interact.
You have to be able to see and use your hands.
Exactly. But here is the detail where the law has to reckon with physics. We wear clothes. Clothes move.
Hmm.
Gravity and wind exist.
They do.
So what happens if a piece of clothing slips during the prayer?
Ugh, the debate on fractions. This is where the pragmatic reality of wearing draped fabric meets the uncompromising nature of the law. You have a legal requirement for perfect coverage, but you have the physical reality of a slippery garment.
Which happens to everyone.
How does the law measure an accident?
Let's walk through the scenario the text poses. A woman is praying. She is fully engaged in the ritual, and her garment slips, exposing a part of her shin. She didn't do it on purpose. It's just the reality of fabric.
Right, it's an accident.
The ruling, according to Abu Hanifa and his companion Muhammad, is that if a quarter, exactly 1/4 of her shin is exposed, the prayer is instantly invalidated, and she must start over and repeat it.
Instantly invalidated.
But if it's anything less than a quarter, she does not have to repeat it.
But then Abu Yusuf, the other remarkably prominent student of Abu Hanifa, steps in and dissents. He argues that the prayer is only invalidated if a full half of the shin is exposed.
A quarter versus a half. I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening who might find this baffling.
Sure.
If the law is so incredibly strict about modesty, why are they allowing any exposure? Why isn't the rule just, if you see skin, you lose?
A zero-tolerance policy.
Yeah. And how does Abu Yusuf justify needing a whole half of the limb to break the rule?
That is the crucial question. Why not zero tolerance? Because zero tolerance in a physical world is a recipe for endless anxiety and broken prayers.
Okay, that makes sense.
If a single millimeter of skin invalidated the prayer, people would be too terrified to move. So they have to establish a threshold of forgiveness.
A threshold of forgiveness. I like that.
Abu Yusuf's justification for the half rule reveals his underlying legal philosophy, which is essentially about the definition of much versus little.
How does he define much?
Well, Abu Yusuf argues that in the eyes of the law, something is only described as much or substantial if the amount opposite to it is less than it.
Okay, wait, run that by me again.
So, for a physical violation to be considered substantial enough to shatter the sacred state of the prayer, the exposed part must cross the threshold of 50%. Anything less than half is, by definition, the minority of the limb.
Oh, I see.
And in his legal framework, the minority is legally negligible. It's absorbed by the majority. If 51% is covered, the law considers the whole thing covered.
That is deeply logical. But Abu Hanifa and Muhammad counter that logic. The text says they argue that a quarter is the magic number because a quarter tells the story of the whole.
Which is a beautiful phrase.
It is.
Yeah.
And I love the analogy they use in the text to prove this. They say that if you see a quarter of a person's face peeking out from behind a wall, you can usually tell who they are. You can recognize them.
Right.
Therefore, mathematically and practically, the quarter effectively represents the entirety.
It is a phenomenal debate about representation.
It makes me think of modern sports replay rules. You know when a football player dives for the end zone, and the referees spend 10 minutes looking at a slow-motion replay to see if the tip of the football broke the invisible white plane.
Yeah, checking the exact millimeter.
They don't care if the player felt like he scored or if the crowd thought he scored. They need a geometric mathematical threshold to remove human bias. That's what these scholars are doing. They are debating the mathematical threshold at which an accident becomes a legal violation.
That sports analogy is perfect because it highlights the goal, which is standardization. Classical Islamic law is deeply concerned with building a scalable system.
A scalable system, right?
When you are prescribing a ritual for millions of people across continents and centuries, you cannot just say, make sure your clothes don't slip too much. What does too much mean?
It's totally subjective.
Exactly. My definition of too much might be vastly different from yours. An anxious person might think a millimeter is too much, while a relaxed person might think a whole leg is fine.
Yeah, my version of too much is definitely different from a 8th century scholar's version.
By defining the threshold as exactly 1/4 versus 1/2, they are deliberately removing human subjectivity from the evaluation of the sacred.
They are replacing subjective anxiety with objective, measurable boundaries. It's a comfort, in a way. You don't have to wonder if you messed up. You just check the math.
Exactly.
But of course, just having the right amount of fabric covering the right zones is only step one. Let's move to step 2 of the physical prerequisites. Purity.
Purity is huge.
The text is completely uncompromising here. You must remove physical impurities from your body and your clothes before you can pray. It cites the Quranic verse, "and your clothing purify."
And we should clarify that impurity here refers to specific physical substances, blood, urine, etc., not just, everyday dust or dirt from walking around. The law requires a state of physical hygiene to enter the spiritual state.
Right. But this is where the text introduces a scenario that absolutely fascinated me, because it creates the ultimate legal paradox. What happens when you are trapped in a situation where your clothes are fundamentally, unavoidably covered in impurity, and you have absolutely no water or way to clean them?
And the clock is ticking down on the prayer time.
Exactly. The clock is ticking.
This is a scenario that truly tests the structural integrity of the law. The scholars are suddenly faced with two competing absolutes. You have the absolute time-bound requirement to perform the prayer before the sun sets or rises.
You can't just delay it forever.
No. And you have the absolute requirement to perform it in pure clothing. When those two immovable objects collide, which one shatters?
The text gives us the exact breakdown, and surprise, surprise, it involves fractions again.
Always fractions.
If a quarter of your garment is clean and the other 3/4 are covered in impurity, you are legally obligated to pray in it. The quarter stands in for the whole, relying on that same Abu Hanifa logic we just talked about regarding the shem.
The quarter tells the story of the whole.
Exactly. The law accepts the 25% cleanliness as good enough under duress. But what if less than a quarter is clean? What if the garment is overwhelmingly, undeniably filthy?
What's fascinating here is that the legal consensus totally breaks down, and the jurists split into two fascinating camps. The scholar Muhammad takes a strictly mathematical, comparative approach to the violations. He says you must still pray in that filthy garment.
Even though it violates the core rule of purity we just established, how does he justify praying in filth?
His reasoning, as detailed in the text, is a calculus of harms. He argues that if you pray in the filthy clothes, yes, you are violating a rule. You are abandoning the obligation of purity.
Right.
But if you take the clothes off to avoid the impurity and you pray naked, you are abandoning multiple, far more severe obligations. You're abandoning the obligation of modesty, the obligation of covering the arah, and the social dignity of the worshiper.
Oh, wow.
So mathematically, violating one rule, purity, is better than violating several rules, modesty and arah.
It's the ultimate legal trolley problem. Pull the lever to violate one rule, or do nothing and violate 3. But Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf look at the exact same trolley problem and offer a completely shocking alternative.
They really do.
The text states that, according to them, if your clothes are that overwhelmingly impure, you are granted a choice. You can choose to pray in the impure clothing, or you can choose to take them off entirely and pray completely naked.
It is a staggering ruling. Think about it. We just spent a massive amount of time analyzing the legal crisis of a quarter of a woman's shin being exposed.
Right, the intense panic over a kneecap.
We established that the arah is a highly restricted zone, and now the founder of the school is saying, actually, in this highly specific distress scenario, you can just abandon the clothes entirely and pray naked.
It feels like a massive contradiction.
Yeah.
How can the law be so obsessed with a fraction of a kneecap one minute and then permit total nudity the next? How do Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf legally defend giving the worshiper the option to be naked?
They argue from a principle of neutralization.
Neutralization.
Yeah. In this extreme trapped situation, both options, praying in filth or praying naked, are fundamentally prohibited under normal circumstances. The law hates both options equally.
They're both terrible choices.
Right. Because both are equally prohibited and the worshiper is trapped, the legal prohibitions effectively cancel each other out, the law neutralizes them, and the individual is given the autonomy to choose their own lesser evil.
Even though the text does carefully note that wearing the impure clothing is technically preferred.
It is preferred, yes. But giving the option is a remarkable moment of the law throwing its hands up and granting human agency in a crisis.
It's an incredible prioritization of the core act of prayer over the aesthetic conditions of the prayer. The prayer must happen even if the conditions are disastrous. And the text takes this even further.
It does.
What if you aren't choosing between duty clothes and no clothes? What if you literally have no clothes at all? You've been robbed or you're shipwrecked. Not even impure clothes are available.
In that case, the law doesn't say, oh, well, you get a pass on praying today. The law demands you show up.
Right. The text mandates that you must pray naked. But the law requires you to fundamentally alter your physical posture to mitigate the violation. You cannot stand up and pray normally.
You have to sit.
You must sit down.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of actually bowing and prostrating on the ground, you just use minimal gestures, nodding your head to indicate the movements.
This specific modification raises a vital question about the underlying philosophy of this jurisprudence. Why mandate sitting and just nodding the head?
Because it's less revealing.
Exactly. The text explains that sitting down provides a natural biological covering for the most severe parts of the Ira. The law demands that you minimize the visual violation as much as physically possible.
Oh, wow.
If you don't have fabric to cover your geometry, you must use the geometry of your own body to create the concealment.
You become your own garment. That is so profound. The law flexes, but it never, ever breaks. It bends backward to accommodate human necessity and indignity, but it still demands that the individual show up, face the divine, and make the effort.
The effort is non-negotiable.
Which leads us perfectly to the third and final physical prerequisite of the perimeter, finding the Qibla, the direction of the prayer.
We've established the physical covering and the purity. Now we have the orientation in space. The text establishes the absolute rule that every person performing the prayer must face the Kaaba in Mecca.
Right.
If you are physically standing inside the city of Mecca, the text says your legal obligation is to face the exact physical building. But if you are far away in another country or continent, your obligation is only to face the general direction.
Which makes sense. Without GPS or satellite mapping, demanding laser precision from 1,000 miles away would be impossible.
That's completely impossible.
The law relies on capacity. But what happens when your capacity drops to zero? What happens when you don't even know the general direction? The text presents this incredibly evocative scenario that feels like a movie scene.
It's a great hypothetical.
Imagine a person is lost in the dark, maybe in a desert or a strange city. They are afraid. The direction is entirely ambiguous. There are no stars visible, and there's absolutely no one around to ask. What does the law require them to do?
In classical legal terms, this person must perform an act called ijtihad.
Ijtihad.
Yeah. Ijtihad literally means to strive or exert effort. They must use whatever intellect and sensory data they have. Look for the moss on a tree, feel the direction of the wind, consider where the sun set, and make their absolute best, most educated guess.
You do the math in your head, you pick a direction, you lock it in, and you pray. But here's the kicker, and this is where the Hanafi school demonstrates this immense psychological grace that I wasn't expecting from such a rigid text.
The morning after scenario.
Let's say you do your ijtihad. You guess that Mecca is to the south. You pray your entire prayer facing south. But the next morning, the sun comes up, you get your bearings, and you realize you are facing the completely wrong way. You are facing east. Do you have to repeat the prayer?
According to the Hanafi text we are analyzing, the answer is a resounding no. You do not have to repeat it.
Which is astonishing. Your objective geographical reality was entirely false. You missed the target by 90 degrees. If this were a missile launch, it would be a disaster.
A total failure.
But the legal text says your spiritual prayer is perfectly valid. Why?
Because, as the text argues, your legal obligation in that moment of crisis was not to hit the objective geographical target. Your obligation was to use your maximum human capacity to try to hit the target.
The effort is what matters.
The Shafi school, the text notes, takes a much harder line. They demand a redo. They argue that once you know for certain you made a mistake, the premise of your prayer collapses retroactively.
That feels so punishing.
But the Hanafi position is that human capacity is the key metric. You did what was in your power at the time. The law values the integrity of your internal effort over the objective geographical reality.
Think about navigating before smartphones. If you printed out MapQuest directions, genuinely tried to follow them, and took a wrong turn because a sign was missing, you still made the journey.
You tried your best.
The effort counts. But the text gives an even wilder scenario regarding this Qibla direction, and it's probably my favorite thought experiment in the entire document. Imagine a group of people, an imam leading a congregation, and they're all lost together in a pitch-black night.
This is perhaps one of the most vivid and complex legal hypothetical scenarios in the classical canon. It tests the boundaries of communal worship.
So paint the picture. It's totally dark. The imam, the leader, makes his best guess and decides to face east. He starts the prayer. But because it's so incredibly dark, the congregation standing right behind him cannot see which way his body is facing.
They are completely blind to his orientation.
So every single person behind him is forced to make their own independent guess, their own ijtihad. The guy in the first row guesses north and faces north. The guy in the second row guesses west and faces west. You have an entire congregation of people facing completely different directions, all supposedly following an imam who is facing east. Is this chaotic, multi-directional prayer legally valid?
The text unequivocally says yes. The prayer of the entire group is valid.
It's mind-bending. You have a completely fractured congregation physically, but legally, the text says it holds together as a unified communal act. How is that possible?
What's fascinating here is the precise condition attached to this validity. The text states it is only valid as long as the followers do not know what the imam has actually done.
Wait, really?
Yeah, if the guy in the first row suddenly gets a flash of lightning and realizes that the imam is facing east while he firmly believes the correct direction is north, his prayer instantly becomes invalid.
Let me make sure I understand this. Why does knowing the truth ruin the prayer?
Because the moment the follower knows that the imam is facing a different direction than what the follower's own intellect has concluded is correct, the follower legally believes the imam is in absolute error.
Oh, I see.
And the core rule of a congregation is that you cannot legally follow a leader whom you believe to be fundamentally wrong. As long as you are ignorant of his direction in the dark, you can safely assume he is correct in his own effort and you are correct in yours.
The darkness is the glue. Ignorance of the objective reality allows the subjective communal bond to survive. If they could see each other, the community would shatter over the disagreement. But because they can't see, they remain unified. That is a profound commentary on human communities in general.
It really is. It suggests that sometimes perfect knowledge of everyone else's internal compass destroys the ability to move together.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered the body's raw, we've navigated the purity of our clothes, or lack thereof, and we've oriented ourselves in the dark space. The physical perimeter is finally secured. Now, how does the mind actually cross over and lock into this sacred state? Physical geography is useless if the mind is completely absent. How does the law measure what's happening inside the practitioner's head?
This is where we transition from the physical geometry of the body to the mental and linguistic gateway of the prayer. You can't just accidentally fall into a prayer.
Right. You can't be stretching your back in your living room, happen to be facing Mecca, and suddenly the law says, congratulations, you're legally praying. There has to be a conscious, deliberate threshold. And the text calls this threshold the niyyah, which translates to the intention. It cites the famous Islamic principle that actions are judged by intentions.
The text mandates that this intention must be incredibly specific. You cannot just vaguely intend to, pray to God in a general sense. You must mentally specify the exact nature of the act.
Like declaring your major.
Kind of. For example, your mind must register, I am praying the obligatory dur, the noon prayer of today. Furthermore, this mental designation cannot be separated from the physical opening of the prayer by any distracting work.
The mind and the body must synchronize perfectly at the starting line. If you make the intention and then eat an apple, you have to make the intention again.
Exactly. The seal is broken.
And here is a detail that I think a lot of people today, even practitioners, get hung up on. The text explicitly notes that speaking your intention out loud, muttering to yourself, I intend to pray the noon prayer, legally means absolutely nothing.
Exactly. The text is very clear on this. It states, as for mentioning it with the tongue, no consideration is given to it. The legal requirement is solely that the individual knows in his heart what he is doing. The heart is the legal organ of intention, not the mouth.
But the text does add this tiny pragmatic caveat. It says that while saying it aloud has zero legal weight, it is considered good for gathering one's resolve. It's a psychological tool. If you were distracted, saying it helps focus the brain. But the law only audits the internal compass.
It's a focus mechanism.
But once that internal compass is set, you have to physically open the door. You have to break the seal. And you do that with the opening phrase, the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar, God is great.
This opening is known as the tarima, which shares a root with the word for forbidden.
Forbidden.
Yeah. It is the consecration that officially prohibits you from doing everyday things. Once you say it, eating, talking, and looking around are now legally forbidden until the ritual ends. You have entered the sterile operating room.
Now, this brings up a massive, massive question. A question that I think anyone looking at a global religion inevitably asks. Does God care what language you use?
The language debate.
If the text just told us that the true legal intention lives entirely in the unseen heart, why does the specific Arabic vocalization of Allahu Akbar matter to open the door?
This specific question triggers one of the most remarkable, progressive, and hotly contested debates in the entire source text. We are looking at a fierce intellectual disagreement between Abu Hanifa and his two leading companions, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad.
And Abu Hanifa takes a stance that is breathtaking in its philosophical openness.
He really does. The text reveals that Abu Hanifa allowed a person to start the prayer, to unlock the sacred gateway using Persian.
Which was the major other language of the region.
Yes. And he didn't just allow it as a crutch for someone who couldn't speak Arabic, he allowed it even if the person knew perfect Arabic.
We really need to pause and appreciate the immense historical and theological weight of that ruling.
It's huge.
In a legal system that is deeply, fundamentally tied to the Arabic Quran, a religion where the sound of Arabic is considered a divine transmission, the founder of the largest school of jurisprudence is arguing that the ultimate divine gateway can be legally unlocked with a completely different language.
And it goes even further. He didn't just allow a direct, literal translation of Allahu Akbar into Persian. The text says, Abu Hanifa allowed a person to start the prayer by saying completely different Arabic phrases, like Allah Ajal, God is most majestic, or Ar-Rahman Akbar, the merciful is great. He allowed substituting the specific names of God.
Naturally, his top students, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, pushed back hard against this. The text details their severe dissent. They insisted that if a person knows Arabic, they absolutely must use the specific Arabic phrase passed down by tradition.
What was their argument? Why were they so strict?
Wait, I'm asking you, why were they so strict?
Oh, right. Well, their argument is straightforward and deeply traditional. The Quran is specifically an Arabic text, the prophetic tradition was delivered in Arabic, and the Arabic language holds a unique, irreplaceable merit in the religion.
The form matters to them.
Exactly. To them, the specific syllables and sounds of Allahu Akbar are not just words. They are structural, load-bearing pillars of the sacred architecture. If you swap out the pillars, the building falls.
But Abu Hanifa counters them, and his argument is essentially a theological mic drop. He uses the Quran to prove that the exact syllables don't matter as much as the meaning. The text points to a verse describing the Quranic message as having existed in the scriptures of the former peoples.
Right, referring to the Torah of Moses, the Gospel of Jesus, the Psalms of David.
Exactly. And Abu Hanifa's brilliant point is this. Those former scriptures were historically not in Arabic, yet the Quran validates them as carrying the same divine message.
Therefore, the essence of the divine message, the true functional mechanism of glorifying God, does not depend on Arabic syntax or vocabulary.
He argues that the meaning, the internal sheer act of magnifying the divine, is what truly matters, not the specific linguistic vessel you use to pour that meaning out. The text summarizes his radical view beautifully. The meaning does not differ with the difference of languages.
It is a profound philosophical distinction between form and substance. Abu Hanifa is actively prioritizing the universal human substance of reverence over the specific cultural form of the Arabic language.
That's a huge shift.
Now, we have to be clear. The text does add a very important legal caveat to his ruling. While he argues it is technically legally valid to use Persian or different phrases, meaning your prayer counts and you don't have to repeat it, he considers it wrong or sinful to do so if you are fully capable of speaking Arabic.
Why is it a sin if it's legally valid?
Because by choosing to use Persian when you know Arabic, you are deliberately breaking the inherited, unifying communal tradition of the Prophet.
So it's legally valid, you check the box, your prayer counts, but you get a demerit on your record for breaking the communal tradition.
Basically, it's a brilliant compromise. It preserves the universal human accessibility of the divine, proving God understands all languages, while simultaneously protecting the specific cultural and historical heritage of the religion.
But this debate over language is happening simultaneously with a physical action. You don't just speak the opening, you move your body, you raise your hands.
Right. The opening takbir is accompanied by raising the hands. And again, the text's precision is staggering. It details exactly how high the hands must go, and it differentiates by gender.
Let's hear the details.
For men, the text mandates raising the hands so that the thumbs align exactly with the earlobes.
But for women, the instruction is noticeably different. Women are told to raise their hands only to shoulder level. Why the difference?
The text explicitly provides the reasoning. Raising the hands only to the shoulders is more concealing for the woman.
Concealing again.
Yes. If she raises them to her ears, her garment might shift, or her posture might expand. Keeping them at the shoulders keeps her physical form more compact, aligning perfectly with the earlier, intense focus we discussed on maintaining the raw and visual modesty.
But here's the detail about raising the hands that I found most genuinely touching in the entire text. Why raise the hands at all? If the intention is in the heart and the word is on the tongue, why the physical gesture?
There are a few theological reasons.
Yeah, but one of them is incredibly specific and practical. You raise your hands to signal the start of the prayer to a deaf person.
For the information of the deaf. That phrase is preserved right there in the classical Arabic text.
It's beautiful. Amidst all this hyper-focused individual legal auditing, checking fractions of shins, analyzing naval boundaries, debating Persian translations, the law suddenly looks outward to the marginalized.
It recognizes that there might be someone in the room who physically cannot hear the imam say, Allahu Akbar.
If there were no physical gesture, the deaf person would be left behind, out of sync with the community. The physical gesture becomes a visual broadcast, ensuring that the deaf member is integrated. It shows a profound communal awareness embedded right into the very first physical movement of the ritual.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates that this rigid architecture isn't just about an isolated individual connecting with God in a vacuum. It's about synchronizing a diverse community. The physical movements act as a shared, visible vocabulary that transcends ability.
Which brings us to the next phase of the ritual. We've opened the door, we've established the intention, we've raised our hands and spoken the words. Now the body begins a highly prescribed sequence of movements. Let's look at the choreography of humility: standing, bowing, and prostrating.
Once the hands are lowered from the opening, the individual enters the prolonged standing phase, known as the qiyam. And immediately, predictably, the texts present another micro-debate on anatomy and posture.
Where exactly do your hands go while you are just standing there? You can't just let them hang by your sides, and you can't put them in your pockets.
The Hanafi text instructs the practitioner to place the right hand over the left hand below the navel. It justifies this specific placement by saying this posture is closer to magnification or deep respect.
It's the historical posture of a humble servant standing submissively before a master.
But the text notes that the Shafi'i school vehemently disagrees with this placement. They argue that the hands must be placed higher up, specifically upon the chest, over the heart.
It's fascinating to think about the psychology behind this. Imagine you were at Buckingham Palace approaching a monarch. If you cross your hands over your waist versus crossing them over your chest, it completely changes the energy you project.
It absolutely does.
Does covering the heart signify a deeper, more intimate reverence? Or does lowering the hands below the navel signify a more total physical submission? They are literally debating the emotional resonance of human anatomy.
And while the body is locked into this highly contested standing posture, the mental work of the prayer begins. This is the recitation phase, the kira. The text mandates the recitation of the Quran.
But again, the lawyers ask, how much recitation is legally required to make the prayer valid? What is the absolute minimum threshold?
The Shafi'i view, cited in our text, is completely uncompromising. Reciting the opening chapter of the Quran, the Fatiha, is an absolute non-negotiable pillar. If you don't read the Fatiha, you haven't prayed. The prayer is void.
Wow, so there's no backup option.
Not for them. But the Hanafi text we are following looks at a different Quranic command, which says, read what is easy of the Quran. They take this incredibly literally. The text argues that the absolute legal minimum to validate the prayer is to recite just one long verse or 3 short verses of any part of the Quran.
Any part at all.
Yeah, the Fatiha is necessary to do the prayer perfectly, but it is not necessary to do it legally.
They are establishing a legal floor. They're saying, look, we want the Fatiha, but if a new convert only knows 3 random sentences of the Quran, their prayer still counts.
Exactly. It lowers the barrier to entry.
But the most intense rule regarding this recitation applies when you are not praying alone, but praying in a congregation, standing behind an imam. The text establishes a rule of absolute unbroken silence for the follower. It states categorically, the recitation of the imam is his recitation.
Meaning the follower's recitation. This is a radical legal and spiritual concept. The follower's individual voice is legally subsumed by the imam's voice. The text explicitly prohibits the follower from reading along or reciting anything while the imam is speaking.
I have to push back on this because it feels completely counterintuitive to spirituality. Let's say I'm standing behind the imam and he recites a beautiful verse about the gardens of paradise or a terrifying verse about the punishments of hellfire.
Yeah.
As a human being, my natural spiritual impulse is to whisper a quick prayer, like, oh God, grant me paradise, or oh God, protect me from that. That feels like a genuine, engaged reaction to the text. Why would the law ban that?
It absolutely feels natural, but the text explicitly forbids even that whispered reaction. It states that listening attentively and remaining completely silent is a superseding divine obligation.
Superseding.
Yeah, if you interrupt that silence to whisper your own personal prayer, even if it's a beautiful, well-meaning prayer, you're violating the formal, synchronized structure of the congregation.
So my individual spiritual impulse is a threat to the collective.
In this specific moment, yes. Your individual feelings must be subordinated to the collective discipline. The imam is acting as the single voice for the entire body. If the cells of the body start speaking for themselves, the organism fractures.
Your personal feelings have to wait their turn. The architecture demands total silence. And from that silent vertical standing, the body finally breaks its axis. We move into the ruku, the bowing.
The text provides a precise geometric description of how to execute the bow. You place your hands on your knees, but you don't just lazily rest them there. You must spread your fingers wide to actively grip the kneecap.
It's an active posture, not a lazy slouch. Your muscles are engaged.
Exactly. And the back must be perfectly flat. The text describes the prophetic ideal. The prophet is described as neither raising his head nor lowering it while bowing. The spine and the neck must form a continuous horizontal line, perfectly parallel to the ground.
The physical precision is astonishing. You are forming a perfect right angle with your body. And from that right angle, you descend all the way to the floor into the ultimate posture of vulnerability and submission, the sujood, the prostration.
This is the climax of the physical ritual. The highest point of the body, the head, is brought to the lowest point of the earth. But as we've come to expect from this brilliant legal text, the exact anatomical requirement of what must touch the ground is fiercely debated.
Oh, of course it is. The text states the baseline rule. You must touch the ground with your face. But Abu Hanifa, who we've seen is always looking for the literal legal minimums, argues that touching just the nose to the ground is legally acceptable to fulfill the prostration.
Just the nose. His reasoning, according to the text, is strictly anatomical. The nose is technically a part of the face. Therefore, placing the nose on the ground literally fulfills the command to prostrate on the face.
I am just picturing someone trying to balance their entire bodily prostration on the tip of their nose while keeping their forehead completely off the ground.
It sounds like a core workout.
It sounds physically absurd, like a yoga move gone wrong.
Yeah.
But legally, he's arguing it checks the required box. However, his companions, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, jump in immediately and say, absolutely not. The forehead is strictly required unless the person has a genuine medical excuse, like a wound on their head.
Their argument against Abu Hanifa is philosophical. They argue the forehead is the very essence of prostration. The forehead is the seat of human pride, the crown of the ego.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. The entire purpose of the sujood is to place that pride directly into the dirt. If you just tap your nose, you are missing the spiritual objective of the physical law.
It's the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. Alongside the face, the text outlines the placement of the rest of the limbs. You must place both hands flat on the ground, both knees, and crucially, your toes must be bent forward so that the tips of the toes point toward the Qibla.
Think about how uncomfortable that is.
I know, try bending your toes like that right now. Every single extremity of the body must be forcefully and actively oriented toward the sacred center.
It requires a high level of physical consciousness. But right in the middle of all these intense, demanding anatomical rules, the text drops this incredibly beautiful, pragmatic exception.
I call it the turban loophole.
It's the perfect example of the reality of the environment asserting itself over the ideal of the ritual.
Imagine you are living in 8th century Arabia. You are praying outside in the desert. The ground is either scorching hot from the midday sun, hot enough to cook on, or it is freezing cold in the middle of a desert night.
The extremes of nature.
The rigid law demands you put your delicate forehead and nose directly onto that extreme surface. But the text explicitly allows a concession. You are permitted to prostrate on the folded layers of your own turban, or you can physically pull the edge of your own cloak or garment over the ground and put your face on the fabric instead of the dirt.
The text notes that this is specifically permitted to protect the practitioner from the severe heat or cold of the earth.
I love this detail because it is just so profoundly human. It's a stark reminder that this rigorous, terrifyingly precise, mathematically obsessed legal system was designed for flesh and blood people living in a harsh, unforgiving climate.
They weren't machines.
No. God wants your ultimate submission, yes, but He doesn't want you to get third-degree burns on your forehead in the process.
It perfectly balances the awe of the divine requirement with deep mercy for the frail physical body. And this intense awareness of the physical body extends, once again, to the gender differences prescribed during the prostration.
Right. Just like the raising of the hands, the text gives very different geometric instructions for men and women regarding how to hold their bodies in sujud.
Men are instructed to actively expand their bodies. They must keep their bellies lifted high away from their thighs, and they must spread their arms out wide like wings.
The text gives this vivid, almost wild historical description, noting that a baby animal, like a lamb, could easily pass underneath the prophet's arms when he was prostrating because he was taking up so much space. The man is instructed to expand.
Whereas the instructions for women are the exact opposite. Women are instructed to lower themselves completely, draw their limbs in tightly, and press their bellies firmly against their thighs.
They were told to compress themselves, to become as physically small and inconspicuous as possible on the ground. The text explicitly states this is so they remain concealed.
It ties perfectly back to the very first prerequisite we discussed, the intense focus on the woman's raw and visual modesty.
The physical architecture of her prayer is built entirely around minimizing her visual footprint, while the man's is built around physical exertion.
This profound choreography of humility, the standing, the right angle bowing, the deep prostrating, is repeated in cycles. It is a continuous loop of ascending and descending, a physical manifestation of internal awe. But eventually, the cycle must end. The worshiper cannot stay in the sacred space forever.
You have to go back to reality. You have to go back to your job, your family, your everyday life. Which brings us to the final phase of our deep dive, returning to the world. How does a person safely and legally exit this state of intense micromanagement and re-enter normal life without breaking the spell at the last second?
The exit process begins with a final concluding posture, the sitting, known as the tashahhud. And just like every single other posture we've examined, the way you sit is strictly legally codified.
You can't just plop down cross-legged and relax. The text details that men must sit on their left foot, folding it flat under them while propping their right foot up vertically, making sure the toes of the right foot are bent hard to face the qibla.
It's very specific.
If you try doing this right now, you'll realize it is a highly active, muscular, and honestly almost uncomfortable way of sitting. You aren't lounging, you are at attention.
And for women, the posture is again modified for the sake of concealment. They do not prop the foot up. Instead, they sit on their left buttock and slide both of their feet out to the right side, keeping their limbs tightly squeezed together.
While sitting locked in this posture, they recite a specific verbal formula. The text states that the Hanafi school prefers the historical formula taught by the companion Ibn Masud, which begins, "The greetings are for Allah and the prayers and the pure things." It's a grand declaration of divine sovereignty.
But before they make the final physical exit from the prayer, there is a small window of opportunity. The text says that right before concluding, one can make a dua, a personal unscripted supplication. You can ask God for things you want.
But this is not a free-for-all. You can't just ask for anything. The text places incredibly strict, fascinating legal boundaries on what exactly you are allowed to ask for in this highly sensitive transitional moment.
This is hands down one of my favorite parts of the text. It reveals the exact razor-thin borderline between divine communion and everyday human transaction.
The rule is that your personal supplication must resemble the elevated language of the Quran or the prophetic traditions. It absolutely cannot resemble the everyday, mundane speech of human beings.
The underlying legal anxiety here is that if you introduce ordinary conversational human language into the final moments of the prayer, you might accidentally invalidate the entire ritual right before you finish it. The prayer is a sacred bubble. Normal speech pops the bubble.
The examples the text gives to illustrate this are just amazing. It says you cannot say, "Oh Allah, marry me to so-and-so." You can't use this sacred window to ask God to play matchmaker for a specific crush.
Which is such a human thing to want to ask for.
Right. Why? Because arranging a marriage, asking for a specific person, is a normal worldly conversation. Humans talk to each other about matchmaking all the time. If you say it in the prayer, it's as if you've broken the sacred seal, turned around and started chatting with your neighbor about your dating life.
But the text immediately provides a contrast to show you how to navigate the rule. It says you're legally allowed to say, "Oh Allah, grant me provision."
Hold on, isn't asking for provision just asking for money or a job? How is that different from asking for a wife?
Because provision is a grand, elevated, abstract concept. The text literally justifies this exception by noting that even kings say provision the army.
Oh, I love that.
It's entirely a matter of vocabulary and linguistic register. Asking for a specific spouse is colloquial and common. Asking for universal provision is majestic and formal. You have to use the high vocabulary of the royal court when speaking to the divine king.
It shows that even in the most intimate moment of personal request, the law demands a linguistic elevation. You are not chatting with a buddy. You are petitioning the sovereign. You must maintain the altitude of the prayer until the very last second.
And that very last second, the official termination of the ritual is the salam, the physical and verbal exit.
To conclude and break the tarima, the individual turns their head entirely to the right and says, "Peace be upon you and the mercy of Allah," and then turns their head entirely to the left and repeats it.
But the text asks a brilliant, deeply psychological question. Who exactly are you talking to? Think about it. You are likely staring at a blank wall in your house, or you are staring at the shoulder of the stranger praying next to you. Who are you greeting with peace be upon you?
The intention must match the action perfectly. The text details that when you turn your head, you must actively, consciously intend to greet the angels. Specifically, the recording watchers that Islamic theology places invisibly on the right and left shoulders of every individual to record their deeds.
It's a sudden, profound psychological shift in awareness. You've spent the entire duration of the prayer locked in a solitary, vertical beam of focus pointing straight up toward God. But to exit the prayer, the law forces you to look horizontally.
You have to acknowledge the unseen beings sitting right next to you. The law forces you to realize that even when you thought you were completely alone in the dark, performing your solitary ijtihad, you were actually in a crowded room.
And if you are an imam leading a group, the text adds another layer to the intention. You must intend to greet the human congregation behind you as well. The exit is a systematic, highly intentional reintegration into the communal and the unseen society around you. You are saying hello to the world again.
Now, before we wrap up our analysis, there's one final overarching rule the text discusses regarding how the prayer interacts with the physical world, and that's the rule of loudness. It's the debate over public versus private recitation.
Right. The text details that the rules for reciting the Quran out loud versus reciting it quietly depend entirely on the time of day the prayer is performed.
The time of day. Okay.
For the imam leading the group, the prayers of Fajr, which is dawn, Maghrib, sunset, and Isha, the night prayer, must be recited out loud. The voice must cut through the darkness or the twilight. The community must hear it.
But the daytime prayers, Dur, the noon prayer, and Asr, the afternoon prayer, must be entirely quiet. The text uses a striking, almost poetic word for this. It calls the daytime prayers mute, or ajma.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What actually constitutes a mute or quiet recitation in the eyes of the law? You can probably guess by now that they don't just leave it up to feeling. The legal definitions get incredibly granular here.
They really do. The text states that merely moving your tongue and your lips in total silence does not legally count as reading. If you just mime the words in your head, your prayer is completely invalid.
In order to legally fulfill the requirement of quiet reading, you must produce enough physical sound to at least hear yourself.
The rationale provided by the classical scholar Al-Hindwani in the text is that the mere movement of the tongue is not called reading without sound. The law requires a physical manifestation of the word. Internal thought is not enough.
The breath must vibrate the vocal cords. The sound waves must physically travel through the air and hit your own eardrum. It requires a closed auditory feedback loop.
I love this concept. It's not enough to just think the prayer. The law demands that you physically birth the word into the real world, even if the entire radius of that world is only the 2 inches between your own mouth and your own ear. It forces the spiritual intention into a physical reality.
It perfectly encapsulates the entire philosophy of this text we've been examining. The internal, unseen intention of the heart is absolutely paramount. Without it, nothing counts. But that internal intention must be rigidly bound to a measurable, physical, geometric reality.
Wow. Let's try to summarize the massive journey we just took through this incredible legal text. We started by orienting the physical body, mapping out the restrictive boundaries of modesty down to the fraction of a shin.
The quarter shin.
We navigated the harsh, pragmatic realities of impure clothing and the shocking loophole of praying naked. We learned how to find a geographic direction even in total darkness, relying on the effort of the mind over the objective reality of the map.
And we crossed the gateway.
Right. Separating the internal intention from the spoken word and exploring Abu Hanifa's radical, progressive openness of using different languages to magnify the divine. We move through a precise, heavily debated geometric choreography of standing, right-angle bowing, and prostrating.
Balancing absolute pride-crushing submission with the beautiful human mercy of prostrating on a folded turban to avoid the hot sand.
And finally, we exited by carefully curating our vocabulary to avoid mundane speech, greeting the unseen angels on our shoulders, and ensuring that even our most silent internal prayers still made a physical sound in the world.
It is a breathtaking, exhaustive system of rules. It is very easy for a modern reader to look at this text, with its intense focus on navels, knees, fractions, and angles, and feel completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of restrictions and conditions. It can feel suffocating to the modern mind.
It absolutely can. And that brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. In our modern hyper-individualistic world, we generally view strict rules, endless checklists, and rigid protocols as the absolute enemy of genuine mindfulness or true spirituality.
We think we need to be unconstrained.
Exactly. We think that to be truly spiritual, our minds need to be completely free from constraints, wandering wherever they want. But looking deeply at the legal genius of these classical texts, you have to ask, could it be the exact opposite?
That's a fascinating question.
Could it be that true spiritual freedom, the kind of deep, unbreakable, laser-like focus required to actually connect with the divine, is actually unlocked by having every single physical variable completely mapped out for you in advance?
Because the decisions are already made.
Think about it. When you don't have to worry about where to put your toes or how high to raise your hands or what language is valid or how to fold your turban because the law has already rigorously solved all of that for you, does that rigid physical architecture actually liberate your mind?
That's powerful.
By locking the body in a cage of rules, does the law provide the stable platform the soul needs to push off against and ascend?
It's a profound paradox that these classical scholars seem to understand deeply. By restricting the physical body so completely, mathematically, and uncompromisingly, they believed they were creating the exact conditions necessary to set the human soul free.
It makes you look at your own daily routines differently. What are the invisible architectures, the rigid rules that you rely on to find focus and freedom in your own life? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the profound, complex, and sometimes mathematically dizzying world of classical jurisprudence. Until next time, keep questioning the rules and keep looking for the hidden meaning behind the architecture.